Greetings, colleagues and friends. Cambria Evans here, the Teaching and Learning EMDR consultant. Y'all, we are on our way in our series of rebranding trauma therapy, and I am so excited about what we're talking about, what we're doing. We're changing therapy. We're changing the experience of clinicians in therapy. We're changing the experience of clients in therapy. This is powerful stuff. I'm into it. I'm here for it. So I've loved going through these conversations with you. It's been a lot of fun and purposeful. So today we're talking about something that if you are a clinician, especially an EMDR clinician or a brain-based modality trauma therapist like brain spotting or art, you've no doubt heard a colleague say this in your consultation group. You've no doubt heard your supervisor or consultant say this to you during a case presentation. If you're a client in therapy, I hope that you have not heard your therapist say this to you because it's inaccurate 99% of the time. But I want to talk about this thing that therapists say that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I want us to think about it together, not to shame people, but to have us put on our clinical reasoning hats, use our clinical reasoning brains to understand what it is we're saying, why it doesn't make any sense, why it's hurtful to the client, and what we can do better to take responsibility in treatment. So the phrase I'm talking about is this phrase we kind of toss around like, oh, my client isn't doing the work. And we say that in consultation for a couple different reasons. And today I want us to learn how to check ourselves as clinicians and also as clients. If your therapist is saying to you, well, you're not really doing your work in here, like you're not really doing your trauma work, I want you to be able to be informed and empowered to have a conversation with your therapist to figure out what they're saying and hopefully, I don't know, maybe get a different therapist. It's kind of a red flag, but it's not the therapist's fault because we're taught to think like this. We're taught to say this to each other. And I want to have everyone looped in on the same page after this episode today. So I'm taking on a big project here, but we do big things here. As Glennon Doyle says, we can do big things and hard things. Okay, so when we say as a trauma therapist, the client isn't doing the work, what do we mean by that? Well, if you're an EMDR clinician or a trauma therapist, what we usually mean is something like this. Yeah, the client's just coming in and they're just like talking about their week, talking about their job, like talking about their marriage. They're not really talking about their trauma. They're not really talking about their childhood. They're not going there. Typically, we're referring to the past where the trauma happened. And because I've decided as the clinician that they're not working on their trauma, they're not going to the past, they're not talking about the trauma, that means they're not doing the work. That means that I have now decided as the, knower of all things that, most of what we're doing here in the therapy room is not efficient. It's not really what we're here to do. Some therapists might even consider it a waste of time. I've heard that in consultation too, unfortunately. And I want to speak to this because I think that when therapists say this, what first comes up for me is, okay, well, if that's what you think is happening or not happening, then help me understand, like if I'm the consultant, help me understand what is happening. Because therapeutically, we know that even if someone comes in and just sits with you in silence for 45 minutes, something therapeutic can happen there, right? Everybody who works with kids or highly traumatized people knows that just being with someone and saying nothing can be highly, highly valuable given their history and kind of what they're taking with them from the history. So we can't judge, we can't knock people for not doing their work in the way that we think they should be doing it. So when someone says to me something like, oh, they're just coming in and chit-chatting about this, this, and this, what I then get really curious about is the belief the clinician is holding, which is, oh, if we're not in the past working on the trauma content, then we're not doing the work. And what I want everyone in here to know and remember is that the past informs the present, informs the future, right? I've said this before. Y'all, your brain does not care what time it is. It does not care. Your brain is linking everything from every time. We have 3 prongs in EMDR: past, present, and future. Yes, you have already made memories of the future that haven't happened yet when you daydream, when you imagine, when you have hopes and dreams, right? Your brain doesn't care what time it is. All these memories, all these experiences are linking all the time in your brain to inform all of your choices, all of your feelings, all of your body sensations. So if we know that's true just from like neuroscience and research, then how can that be true? And also it's true that we're not working on anything unless we're in the past. Those two things don't go together, and they can't go together. So what I would like clinicians to task themselves with, instead of saying, well, my client's not doing the work, meaning my client's not going back to the past to do their trauma work, I want to offer a reframe. Because I think once clinicians decide this is not happening the way it's supposed to, things can get toxic. The clinician can start to feel frustrated. The clinician can start to feel like what's supposed to be happening isn't, and it must be someone's fault. In this case, we're going to blame the client. Sometimes clinicians blame themselves. But what I want to offer is a different idea, which is that your client is always doing the work, because the work can happen. Trauma work can happen, especially EMDR, in any of the 3 prongs. It can happen if we go back to the past and have a past trauma target. That's tradition. That's the traditional protocol. It can happen in the present, right? I'm being triggered in the present by my boss, by my marriage, by my kids. It's all linked to everything. We can go into the future template, right? If someone comes into your office and only talks about the future, oh, I can't wait to get out of here. I'm going to go move to Colorado and I'm going to live in the mountains. And like, I have all these ideas. That's all important information about the work, about their trauma work, because we know from this series alone that it's not about the traumatic event itself alone. It's about what was learned or decided, and then what adaptations were created or urges in response, right? What behaviors were developed, what parts were created to do different tasks for you. If you have a client coming in who's only talking about the future, that's an adaptation. That is like the richest clinical content ever, maybe, right? You don't even have to know about their past trauma, or you don't even have to go back there, because we have all these adaptations at work in the room. We have clients come in, we think they're avoiding. Oh, they're not talking about it, so they're avoiding. Okay, maybe that's true. And that means they have an adaptation. They have a part of them that has learned to keep themselves safe, good enough, in control by not going there. I mean, most people don't want to go there. It's not that crazy of an adaptation. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for clinicians to say to each other even, my client's not doing the work. And if any clinician listening to this has said to their client, well, you're not doing the work, I want you to listen to this episode like 3 different times. If you're a client whose therapist has said this to you and hasn't listened to this episode, just send it to them so you guys can have a healthier conversation, okay? So all the time, no matter what prong we're in, past, present, or future, we're always with adaptations in the room. We can't come in without them. And we're always with what has been learned or decided, because we are always with our beliefs. They're always with us. Now, we can leave trauma content in the past and not go back there and do the work. We don't have to even talk about it if we use EMDR, right? We can process without it. But you can access what is needing attention, where you can access parts of yourself that need to be rescued, and these precious parts need to be soothed. You can do that by working with people's adaptations in their different parts, no matter what they're talking about, okay? I oftentimes think about this with my EMDR consultees as a pool. So if we think about trauma work, or we think about what's disturbing, if you visualize a pool, there's a shallow end, it gets deeper and deeper, and then there's a deep end. So unfortunately, and I really hope this changes, because I believe it's very, very wrong. And I'm taking a risk saying this because it goes against basic standard protocol, it goes against tradition, but I don't actually think most people coming in for EMDR therapy should start with this idea of a first memory or a worst memory, right? In EMDR basic training, they say to you, Target the first and the worst. Go back as young as you possibly can. Go back to the worst possible traumatic memory. Get back there and then start working. Whoa. I mean, could you imagine going to swim class and your coach, who you're supposed to feel safe with and trust and you've never swam before, was like, all right, jump in the deep end. Let's go. Let's learn how to swim. I mean, there are some swim coaches actually like this. I would never take my kids to the swim coach. I wouldn't want to have a swim coach like this because there's not a lot of safety, trust, autonomy. There's a lot of like, just trust me and trust the process, right? Can therapists please, for the love of all that is holy, stop saying trust the process to our clients? They haven't been to EMDR training. They don't know what the process is. And even if you explained it to them and sent them all the links, they've never done this before. And most people coming in for trauma therapy have an adaptation to not trust themselves, trust you, trust others, trust the world. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous thing to say to somebody who's coming in for any kind of complex PTSD. It just doesn't make sense. So this idea of the pool and telling someone to jump into the deep end and to have someone actually have the agency to or the cleverness to say, not right now, or no thank you, or that's too much, or let me get out of that by, kind of hanging out by the edge of the pool. I love that a client would say no to me. I love that a client would say not right now because that's reparative. We want those parts of them to be able to say that. We want those parts of them to be able to say, I don't trust you yet. I don't trust this process. I'm not going back to my first or worst, earliest memory. Have you lost your damn mind? And then on top of that, for the clinician to shame the client for not doing it the way you said. I mean, all of this is just, it's abusive, really. If you think about it, it's almost for some people like a recreation of what they experienced, the reason why they're in therapy. So if we think about the pool, what would it look like if we did the work of learning how to swim in the shallow end? Or what if we even just started at the edge of the pool and just stood there and looked at it together? That's doing something. That's doing the work. What if we sat on the edge of the pool together and we put our toes in and we put our legs in up to our knees, but we're still sitting on the edge. We still have a balance between going fully into the work and where we are here. So the client should always decide where they are in relation to their work. If they want to be out of the pool, that is the exact right place to be. If they want to be in the shallow end, that is the exact right place to be. If they want to jump into the deep end, that is the exact right place to be for that client. And as clinicians, we have to let go of this idea that there's one right way to do this for every client. I mean, that idea in itself doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. And we have to let it go. We have to let it go if we're going to have EMDR be more accessible to people. This is part of the rebrand, y'all. And I know this is hard to hear. And I know that a lot of people trained in EMDR are going to email me and they're going to say, well, my basic trainer said this and this consultant said this. And you know what? Everyone is entitled to their opinions. I am saying all of this with love. You don't have to agree with me. However, there needs to be a conversation about why we say what we say, especially to our clients, to ourselves, to each other. There has to be a conversation about why we think the way we do. This is no different than people coming in with intergenerational trauma or like a curriculum that's been passed down to them from their grandparents and their parents about beliefs and who you are. I mean, if we as clinicians don't stop and think about why we're saying what we're saying, why we believe what we believe, if we don't have some kind of a clinical reasoning brain, then we are not modeling health for our clients. We are not modeling flexibility, critical thinking, trusting ourselves in the moment, flexibility, capability. We're not modeling that for our client. And then how effective can we really be for them if we are showing up with a lot of the same adaptations and beliefs that they're stuck in, that they want to get out of? It's the same thing. That's the same thing. Okay. So if you have a client coming in and they are not going in the deep end of the pool, or they're not even going in the shallow end of the pool, or let's say they don't even want, they're like, I'm here, but I don't really want to learn how to swim. I don't actually, or I didn't know how to swim. I don't want to go in there, right? Whatever they're saying, if they are in your office, they're doing the damn work, period. And I want to task you as the clinician to do two things. I want you to always notice with your client, with their permission, is it okay if you and I notice together when we are meeting a new adaptation? When we have bumping up against a part of you that's like, I don't want to work on the trauma today. Let's focus on the present. Okay. Maybe that request is giving that client a positive resource day. We talked about this in previous episodes. Triggers and trauma in the past should not be the focus of therapy. What a freaking bummer. Okay. We also need to focus on building adaptive material, positive resources. I tell my clients all the time, when you come into therapy, it's not going to be all trauma all day. I mean, that's so imbalanced. It can't be that all the time. We can't always go in the deep end of the pool every time. So we can notice it, but we're not going to shame it if it's not happening. And do we as clinicians, number two, do we as clinicians reinforce our clients' sense of self for even being in the room? Even if you have internalized the voice of a basic training in EMDR or a really old school EMDR consultant or teacher who says, if clients are not doing the trauma work in the past, first and worst, they're not doing the work. Even if you have internalized that, and even if you feel frustrated, is there another part of you that can say to your client, you know what? I am just sitting here so appreciative of you that you came in today to just be curious about yourself with me. What's it like to notice that with me? And what does that mean about you? And the client gets to leave your office with a belief of, I am capable, or I have what I need, or I have choices now. A lot of our clients didn't have choices. That's why they're in your office doing trauma therapy. Let's celebrate the positive cognitions, the positive protective adaptations they're bringing in with them and showing you. Let's expand our definition of what it means to do the work. It's all the work. It's all the work. Okay. And I also want to talk about too that, we had another episode in this series about drills and how it's the clinician's job, it's your task to make sure that your client's practicing to be able to do the hard work, the trauma therapy. What are the warm-ups you're doing? If I want to go run a marathon, which just to be clear, I have no interest in doing this. At the age of 43, I did used to do half marathons, but that was, 15 years ago. But let's say you're doing a marathon. You don't start practicing for a marathon by running 20 miles. If you do, you're going to be really, really somatically screwed. You're going to be sore, right? You're going to mess up your muscles. And who knows what you're going to do? It's not going to be good for most people. Okay. Asking your clients to do first and worst right off the bat, it's the same shit as far as I'm concerned. Okay. So how do we let them warm up to it? How do we get them to be interested and curious about putting their feet in the pool or running around the block? How do we do a warm up? What's really cool about a warm up is that it's a baby step. It's a small step to collect data and say, oh, okay, got it. So when you run, I notice that your foot kind of leans like this to compensate for your bad knee. Let's talk about that. Let's be curious about that, right? Or, hey, I noticed when you got into the pool, your body kind of froze. It looked like you were cold. Let's talk about what you need there. Okay. Just like when we start any kind of trauma therapy, especially EMDR, right from the beginning, we're warming up in phases 1 and 2. We're going to notice all the data to help us in phase 4 process a trauma target. Okay. And we're going to ease into it because there is no better resource than a successfully completed target. It does not have to be the first and worst thing that's ever happened to somebody. It can be something that has a disturbance of a 3 or 4 on a disturbance scale of 10. I think it actually should be. I think that actually every other content area of drills and practicing and warming up or learning anything tells us that we do it in pieces. Okay. You also warm up when you learn to ride a bike or drive a car. Heaven forbid you learn to ride a bike by like being taken to the top of a hill with no training wheels and just let go. I mean, that is a way to learn. Is it traumatic? Yes, it is. Does it create a sense of safety and trust? I would say no, but that's just my opinion, right? You're welcome to disagree with me. I want you to think about how people are allowed to drive a car. They have to do driver's ed. And when you do driver's ed, there's a lot that happens before you actually physically get into the car, get into the driver's seat, put your hands in the wheel. And even then, you have someone next to you who has brakes and like can control the car if they need to, okay? So zooming out with all this information in front of us, it's pretty clear, and I know I'm being extreme to be kind of ridiculous for the point of driving home learning here. But it's pretty clear that this idea of first and worst, deep end of the pool for trauma therapy from the get-go is ridiculous. It's outdated. We know too much about the brain, too much about the body, and too much about how people learn from when this was decided back in the 80s. So I need therapists to evolve around their thinking around this. I need clients to never hear this from their therapist. If you have heard this from your therapist, red flag, right? Any relationship, green flags, red flags, this is a red one. And what it means is that your therapist was trained by somebody who was trained by somebody else who probably like trained with Francine Shapiro and therefore has taken all of this as the holy grail and doesn't have the ability to have flexibility around it. Okay? And I'm sorry about that, but I want you to hear me say this, that it's okay to do anything in therapy that is at all related to what you need help with. Okay? Because the client should have complete agency in that space, especially because a lot of our clients had no agency in certain situations. Again, why they're in your office doing trauma therapy with you. Okay? So I hope that this has been helpful. I obviously feel very protective of people who have had traumatic experiences that have impacted them negatively. It's why I do this work. It's why I love talking about it and thinking about it and reading about it and teaching about it. And I actually feel really protective of therapists who have been misinformed with good intentions from their teachers. And I hope that if this episode today has got you thinking, has got you feeling some relief and some freedom and some, I was wondering why that didn't make any sense when I heard that in my training. Okay, I want you to share this episode with anyone else that you think might benefit from feeling less shame, less rigidity, and more permission to customize, be curious, and do experiments, so that the clients and the therapists feel curious, safe, and empowered. Okay? So as always, I love having thoughtful conversations with you. If this is getting something moving inside of you that feels positive, good energy, please do make sure you subscribe to join us. We put out information and conversations every week here in the Zero Disturbance community. And I'm looking forward to next time. But in the meantime, please take care and be well. You deserve it. Take care.